Hello.
Hello.
Naturally, give everybody some time to join in, then we'll get started. I'm not sure if Brian told you already, but I'll be going over today's class.
Cool.
How's your week going so far?
So far, can't complain.
So, I hear you.
Me
How's
either.
yours? Good.
Mine's going pretty good. Busy week, of course, but not too shabby. I'm call it productive.
Excellent.
We'll give a couple more minutes and then we'll go ahead and get started. Hey Wayne, how's it going?
It's going good. How are you doing?
I am doing good myself. Okay. All right. I guess we'll go ahead and get started before we jump right in. I know we learned something new, of course. So do we have any issues and any particular questions that we ran into over the week? Okay. No worries. Can everybody hear me all right? We're good? Okay. All right. So for module two, week three, we're going to be talking about arrays, objects, and loops. Um, so first thing we're going to cover is going to be the array. Let me make sure. Actually, let me make sure this is okay. I just wanted to make sure it was recording first. All right. So first thing we're going to be talking about is arrays. One thing you probably noticed about the arrays are essentially like a list of items, right? An array can contain anything. It can contain like your primitives, like the string, numbers, booleans, but it can also contain things like other arrays and objects as well. So, an array is index based, as you know. I know we spoke a little bit about that earlier, but it's zero index. So in order to with the fruits. So we got the bracket notation. The zero always going to reference your. You know what? It would probably be helpful if I shared my screen, huh? I I thought I was already shared it. Let me go ahead and share that for you. Okay. We can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. Okay, so arrays, like I said, you can think of them like a list. This is going to be a list of uh items. So it could be string, numbers, booleans. It can be another array, and or objects. And we call those when you have an array, we just call it a nested array. Uh, and it can essentially go on, you know, forever until you run out of memory, essentially. So it can be an array, an array, and an array. So that can get kind of confusing, and you might see that. Um, there's some controls we have for that per se, but so like I said, it's zero index. So that's with bracket notation, the zero is going to reference that first item in the array, and so on. So 0, 1, 2, as you can see here, fruits with the uh, zero index gets you is going to return the first element, which is apple. And then, as you can see, the fruits with the 2 is going to be the 0, 1, 2 is going to be the cherry. And then, so we have our methods. Um, on our array, similar to how we had the methods on strings that you can call. Uh, like on a string, you got the dot length. So fruits dot length is gonna return the length of an array. Um, and then a common thing that you will see when trying to access an item in an array. Let's say you want to access the very last item in an array, you would do the fruits dot length -1. So like I said, the length comes out to 3 for this one, but we know that if we did the um, bracket notation for 3, it's not going to return the cherry. We're going to want to do 2. So fruits dot length -1 is going to get you the last item of an array. And then, like I said, we have just similar to how we have on strings. Methods have their own methods. Arrays have their own methods that you can call as well. So we have our array variable here that we declare is going to have the strings A, B, and C. Well, before I move on to this, do we have any questions so far? No, I'm not moving too fast, am I? Okay, perfect. All right, methods that can change an array. So like I said, similar to a string, arrays have their own little subset of methods that you can call. So we have the array dot push, and we're pushing in a string, the letter D, and a push is going to add to the end. So you can kind of think of it in this sense with because the push and the pop, the push is gonna push it on to the end of the array, and then the pop is gonna pop it off the end of the array. So you can see the pop is just like, the empty brackets, or yeah, the empty brackets. So the empty parentheses, because it's just gonna be popping from the end of the array regardless, right? But the push, you have the string that you want to insert, or the item, I should say, not the string, but whatever you can push an object is going to attach it to the array. You can also push another array uh, to the end of an array. And then we have our unshift, and then we are adding similar to the push, but it's kind of a weird naming convention because you hear unshift and you think it's going to be taking something away. But it'll make a little bit more sense when we talk about make a little bit more sense when we talk about shift. So unshift is going to push it to the front of the array. So it's gonna take it, and then it's gonna push it to the front of the array. So it'll be at the very front. And then shift is going to, similar to pop, but from the front of the array, the beginning of the array, it's gonna take it away from the array. So with this one, you'll shift, and it's gonna remove this A string, and then you're gonna be left with B and C. But I think in this instance, it's telling you that it added the Z, and then shift, we're removing that Z and then returning it to its original state, right? Uh, it's called shift, because if you were to create a function that remove the first item in an array, what's going to happen is you're going to remove that item, and then remember it's a zero based indexing. So it's gonna remove that item, and then you have to see zero, was zero, B was one, and C was two. You remove A, so now B has to become zero, and C has to become one. So all the remaining items are shifting down, kind of like if you were standing in a line to get into like a movie theater or something, uh, or to purchase something, the first person is served, and then the rest of the line shift down. So that's why it's called shift, because you remove that item and everything shifts. So that's what the term unshift comes from, because you it's kind of backwards, because you can put any item in there, so it's not like you're undoing a shift, but it's giving you that imagery of an unshift. So you're quote unquote unshifting everything that way and then inserting an item. And then we have our splice method. So what splice does is it takes in two arguments, right? The first one is telling you where to start on an array. So what index to start. Um, so it's telling us, oh, from the previous one, we got 0, 1. So we're going to start here, and then it's telling you from that starting position how many items to remove. It removes it, but it also returns it. So if you were to do one and one, so you start in position one, how many items to remove? One. It's going to remove this uh item at index one, which is the B string, and then it's going to actually return it as well. So it's good for if you were wanting to move, you had like, if this was like the full alphabet, but you want to remove B and C, you can do that. And then you also get confirmation of what items were removed as well. So, but then those are gone, and then just the remaining items as well. So if you had something keeping track of that string and the items that were in it, it's also an easier way to track that as well. Any questions about that so far? No.
I have one question just out of curiosity.
Yes.
So let's say that you have like a large array
Mm-hmm.
and you know that you want to take out a specific value. You don't know
Mm-hmm.
where it is in the index though.
Mm-hmm.
How would you do that? Like let's say I wanted to take out like B, but I didn't know that it was like index two. Is there a way that I
Gotcha.
could input like almost like a find on the
Mm-hmm.
document? How
Yep.
would you do that?
So, um, we actually are going to be getting into the method that would do that, which would be a loop. So, if you were doing it that way, you would be using a loop, and what's going to happen is you're going to loop through each item in the array. Um, and there's different conditions that you can create, right, when you're doing the loop. So if we were starting with this one, we use the longer one, and you were looking for that B, right? You're gonna have a loop that's gonna go through each item. So it's gonna check this one, and it's gonna do a comparison. Okay, does this equal the item that I'm looking for, which is the B? It doesn't, so it's gonna move on to the next one. And then it's gonna look and see that this doesn't equal that, and then it's gonna move on to the next one, and then it's gonna do that comparison, and then it's gonna check, and it's gonna see it's a match. So now that it does match, it's going to take another action to remove it. So it will, um, I will say, I'm trying to say it in a way where it's not overwhelming, but you're also keeping track of what index you're at while you're going through it, right? So it'll say, okay, I know that I'm at index two, and I'm at index 2 and this matches at index 2. So I now know that it's at index 2. So then you can have it do a splice to where it's going to start at index 2 and then it's going to remove that one item. Does that
Mhm.
make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's multiple ways that you can do that same exact thing. Um, in JavaScript, I don't know the name of the method off the top of my head, but one of the cool things about JavaScript is they do a lot of these things for you. Uh, they have a method that, where you can put in that value and it hunts for it for you and then removes it. So, we teach you the basics of these things. There's some things that we're going to teach you that JavaScript does have methods for already, but we're teaching you so you understand the underlying functionality of it, so you understand what's going on. So if when it's proper to use one method over another method, and all that good stuff. But essentially, that's one of the use cases for a loop, which of course we're going to be going over today as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Of course. All right. So methods that return new values. So we are initiating that array, constant, that variable, and it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we got an array with 5 numbers. So the um array dot slice is similar to the splice. It's going to tell you what index to start at. And then this one is not, what's the word? I want to say this one is not changing the array. It's just returning the values, right? So it is going to count up to this index, but it's not going to return that index, right? So if we're starting at index 1, so 0, 1, we're looking at this 2 and starting from the um from the 1 index all the way to the 3 index. So it's going to go 0, 1. So it starts here and then the 2 index, and then it's going to get to 3 index. But we're stopping at 3, but we're not returning the item at index 3. So it's going to return 2 and 3. I know it can get a little bit confusing. It takes some getting used to that idea because you think it's going to return the item at index 3 as well, but you just want to remember that it's going to stop at 3 but not return that item. So and then the variation of that is if you're going to pass one argument. So this one can take 1 or 2 arguments, but if you pass one argument, it's going to start so this one's 2, so at index 2, and then it's going to return everything starting from index 2 to the rest of the array. So it's going to return the full array after that position, including that position. So start at 2, and then the rest of the array is going to return everything. So the 3, 4, and 5. And then we have the array dot index of 3. So this is going back to what I said, that you might, if you're looking for a particular value, JavaScript does have methods built in to help you find particular values, right? So we have the array dot index of 3. So if you're looking for that number 3, so it's going to find the first item that matches. So it's going to go through, look, it's going to do that same loop that we talked about, right? Where it's checking, and then it's going to find the match, and then it's going to return the index that it found it at. And then array dot includes 3. So what this is doing is it's checking through the array to see if it basically contains this value. Does it have this value in this array? So it's checking and it does, so it's going to return true. It's going to return a Boolean value. So it's going to be true. If it was to be 6, then it would return false. So this is good for if you just have a check and you have a condition where um yeah, you have a condition where you're only responding to arrays that have 7 in it. And if it doesn't have 7 in it, you're gonna skip it. It's a way to save time, so you're not wasting resources like processors on um items that don't meet those conditions. And then a join array dot join is essentially is going to stringify your array. So uh whatever you pass in here, so you have the quote. So one thing to pay attention to this particular example is it has the comma. So you're gonna have like a string that is gonna separate these values by. So you have the comma and then a space here. So what it's gonna do is it's going to uh create a string, um and it's going to take all of these values and turn them into one long string essentially, right? And this what you pass here is telling you to this is the separator. So what to separate them by. So it could have been a dash, it could have been slashes, it could have been anything, right? So it's a comma space, and then you see here it's no longer an array, it's just one string, and it's separated by this comma space. So you got the one value is being transformed into, and then you got the um, comma space, and then it got the next item, two, and then comma space, right? So it just transformed it, and it just went through. Uh, but that's pretty straightforward. Any questions about any of that? No? Pretty straightforward. I know it's a lot to take in. One thing I do want to emphasize is you want to make sure that you want to understand this stuff, kind of know that they exist, understand, there's tools that you can use to meet these certain goals. No one's expecting you to remember all these methods off the top of your head, right? Um, it's good to some of them are more common than others, so there are some that you would sort of be expected to remember as you go on just because you're going to use them pretty often because you'll probably use like splice or slice pretty often, some that you use real world. You're definitely going to be using like includes, index of. You'll definitely be using like join, right, when you are creating like dynamic strings from like different sources. So these are some things that you want to not necessarily just familiarize yourself with the fact that they exist, right? And that you know where to go to look for them. I know we've seen the MDN website. That is a really good resource. If you're working with something and you're like, oh, I know that's a method, then they separate their list of methods by the type, right? They separate them by string, um, array objects, so you can find methods that way. And of course, a really good quick and fast resource would be uh Google searching. You can Google search it or just using AI and saying, hey, I need a function that turns an array into one string or something like that, right? So that's just something to keep in mind as well. So, like I said, I just really want to emphasize that you're not expected to remember all of this stuff. You just knowing where to go to find it is a big part of the problem, right? And then as you go on, you'll start building muscle memory with different things, with the things that you do while you're working on stuff. Important thing to remember is that arrays are references, they're not copies. So what that means is, so we have the original array here, right? this one that's been declared as the original array, which is 1, 2, and 3. Has 3 items, 1, 2, 3. Const not a copy equals original. So what's happening here is since this one already exists, all this is just mapping to this array essentially. So you think of it, you want to, so one thing to understand is when you declare variables, what's happening is they're taking up memory uh on your machine, right? So it's using memory, so it points it to a specific location in memory. So when you declare it here, it's declared with a um basically an address telling the computer like where to find this at. So when it sees original, it knows, okay, I know it's at this address. So when you do const not a copy equals original, all you're doing is basically telling it, hey, this is the address to that reference, right? So this is the reference to that address. So it's not replacing it or it's not creating a true copy of it. It's not taking it and then making it its own. All it is just basically pointing to that. Um, you can you can kind of think of it like um if you had like a business, right? You can say this is the address, right? So this is the address and all this is, and if you said that business was like coffee shop and you say this is a really bad example, but it's just to prove a point. But if you say, oh, uh that business is coffee shop, and you know in your mind it tells you, oh, coffee shop is at this address. I know nobody remembers just addresses of businesses randomly, but coffee shop is a reference to this address. So I know that coffee shop is this address. And then so it's really so whether somebody gave you the name of the business or the actual address, you're going to end up in the same spot. So when you do one of the methods that we talked about that changes the array, so not a copy dot push, four, we're gonna push four into it. You when you print that out, when you console.log it out original, you see that we get that changed array that we see that it changed that array, the original array. So that's one thing to keep in mind if you're ever having an issue with an array where it's you did something like this, you try to access another array or create a copy of another array, but the copied version is returning a value that you didn't expect, or you're getting an error because it didn't, uh, you're getting an error because you created that copy and then you try to use that for something else, but then you just made all of these changes to the original array. And for whatever reason, you have to return the original array uh pass it through another item, then it's already had all these changes. So it's compromised. That you that probably should be like the first step of your troubleshooting is to make sure that you mapped it, you copied it the right way. And there is a right way to create an actual copy, uh, which is the which we call the spread syntax. So what the spread syntax does is you're declaring the array, you notate, you put it in an array, and what the spread syntax does is basically it's looping through the array and returning each individual item. So it's like as if you are inputting those items into that new array. So that's how you create a true copy. Um, which, like I said, this is one of those JavaScript methods that is essentially, yeah, one of those built-in JavaScript methods that is using a loop as well, so that you don't have to build a custom loop every time. Does that make sense? Yes.
Okay, so I think I'm not 100% sure on
Mhm.
creating an actual copy.
Right.
So it's const name of the array that you want to make
Yes.
equals brackets, and then what exactly do you put? Like, is it dot dot dot, and then the name of the
Yeah. So the spread operator is these three dots specifically. So it's
okay.
so you can think of it spreading out that array and then inputting it. So it's just an operator that tells what so you put it in front of array and it's telling the system to go in to that array, take every item and return it as an individual value, as its individual value. So it'll go in and it'll take this one. It says, okay, and instead of just using the address to where this is located, it's actually returning those values. Remember, if we return a value,
Mhm,
it's sending that value to what called it. So it's
mhm,
returning those values and then it's gonna input them in. Essentially, realistically, it's inputting them in one by one. So it's going in, okay, it's taking this one and it's putting it in there and it's returning it and then it's gonna set that as that zero index and it's gonna set this that it's gonna go to the one index, it's gonna set this one as the one index in the new array. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to be clear on how exactly you
Hmm.
format that part. But I think I
Yeah,
get it. So
yeah, it's just
dot 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 name of the array that you want to copy.
exactly. Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Yep. So even if you were to do not a copy, it would do the same thing because they're referencing the same thing. So it'll do the exact same thing. Had it been not a copy, it'll go in. So it can be any array. And then it's going to be the same exact value. So, and then you can also, you can also do this uh, with multiple arrays. So if we were to put a comma after the original and then do another dot 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 and did the same thing with not a copy, then you would end up with an array that has 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Does that make sense? So you can essentially stack them and do it with separate arrays. So it's also a quick way if you wanted to combine arrays, you could do them by comma separated values. Not to try to throw too much at you, but that's just
Okay.
something to keep in mind as well. And it maintains the original order of each array. Any other questions about that or arrays in general?
Mhm.
Nope. Okay. All right. Well, in that case, we'll move on to objects. Objects are a little bit different. Uh, if you think of so I tell you arrays are like lists. Objects are also kind of like lists, but they're more so used to create they're called objects, right? They're more so think about it as like creating like objects in real life. That's what they are designed to do, right? So if you were to have, let's say, a um person, right? If this object name was person, then you're you're modeling this object after a person. So it would be like age, um, age, height, weight, a lot of things that make a person, different characteristics that can make up a person. Um, so that's kind of the idea behind objects. You want to use objects, um, uh, to build out that type of stuff. But one of the main differences is that these are key value pairs. So you have a key, which is the name. So basically, the name. Uh, you can think of a key of like the name of that instance. And then the value, which is for this case, the key is going to be ID. and the value is going to be 1. And these are separated. So I should say these have they're sandwiched in between the curly braces. So we got the little curly braces that indicates that it's going to be an object. And then so just like I didn't mention this, but arrays and objects, they can be empty. So you can have an empty array and empty object. Um, so going back to it, so we got the key and then the value, and then they are going to be separated by a comma. Um, you often see them um with these uh line breaks just for formatting purposes to make it a little bit more readable. But they can also be on the same line. It's just a little bit, since they have the key value pairs, it's a little bit easier to read them when they are separated by the line breaks. So all these are the key value pairs, and then they have the colon is to what separates the key and the value. So a lot of times one confusion that a lot of people will get will be the equal sign. A lot of times you will make the mistake of using an equal sign instead of the colon. So if you ever get an error, just think, oh, colon, right? It could be the way I'm telling it. Um, so that's one thing to keep in mind. Um, and then the the keys, they are, I want to say, I'll call it plain text. I forget what we technically call them. So you can see keys where there are strings, but you usually see them in this format with no parentheses. Um, but keys can be strings, and then the value can be pretty much anything. It can be a boolean, it can be a number, a string, it can even be an array. And then I know we talked about this before about the dot notation and the bracket notation. So one way you would access um an item in an object is dot notation. So you have the expense and then dot description. And it's going to return. So you're accessing it by the key. So that's one way to think about it is the key is the way to access that value to that particular value. So this is the key. You got the description. It's gonna find this key and it's gonna return this value, which is the coffee. Then similar to how we spoke about when we did the strings, you can access with bracket notation as well. So this is um required when you are having to deal with like special characters. So like if you had to deal with a space or a space or a like the hyphen, the dash, yeah, the dash, then you want to use bracket notation. Um it depends. You can use it comes down to preference, or consistency, whatever your code base is already using, or which one you just prefer. You choose to use? A lot of people like to use dot notation because you type in one dot versus brackets plus having to put it in parentheses. Some people think this is easier to read, but it comes down to preference. This is more efficient in terms of if you're going through and writing out code, right? Um, and then const key. Yeah. Okay. Yep. So um we can also use variables to access um keys. inside of objects, right? So const key equals amount. So we can do the expense, and then in the bracket notation, we'll do key. So for this, you also want to use bracket notation as well, because we're returning a string. It's already in that string format. So you're going to use that bracket notation, and it's going to transpose into this, and it's going to return the amount. So it's looking for that key amount, and it's going to return the value, which is uh, $4.50. Does that make sense?
I have a question. Why wouldn't you use the dot notation in that case?
So if you use the dot notation, it's going to be looking for the key. It's going to be looking for this key. It's going to look for the key that equals key. Does that make sense?
Oh, okay.
So it's going to go through it's like, okay, that doesn't match. That doesn't match. That doesn't match. Because it's looking for the word key. Or yeah, the value that equals key for this. So and it's not gonna find one. So that's why bracket notation is better, because it's going to see this as the key, and it's going to actually look for this value, because we already told JavaScript that we want this to equal this. So it's going to go and it's going to turn this into that. So the computer is looking at it in this format and not as key. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Yeah.
I have a question as well, kind of
Mhm.
based on the same thing as Wayne.
Right.
I'm where does the key come from? Like what because I what does key mean, I guess?
It's like think of it as a key to a door. Your that key is, if we so let's say each one of these reference a door, right? So we got four doors, right? And it's not necessarily, in this instance, they're not necessarily secrets, right? We're not trying to hide anything, but to be able to access, we want to make sure that we're accessing the right thing, right? So instead of one key opening every door, we use a specific key to access that specific door. So the key represents that. So we're telling uh JavaScript essentially, okay, I want to go to expense, and I want to find the door that matches this key. So it's gonna go in and it's gonna look for that key, and it's like, okay, well, this key doesn't fit, so it's not the right door. But it sees that, okay, this key matches the key that was provided. So then it's going to say, okay, this is the right door. So let me return the value that's behind this door. Does that make sense? So if it went through and it didn't contain the key, then we wouldn't get a value back. We wouldn't have anything returned in that instance.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, I have one more question,
Of
and
course.
if it's something that we shouldn't cover right now, then that's fine. I'm just gonna
Hmm.
have to think about it. But I'm picturing a situation where, let's say that it's I'm programming something that has like multiple objects, like people.
Hmm.
Um, how would you go about like finding something? Like, let's say, okay, so the expense example.
Hmm.
Let's say that there was like five different things.
Hmm.
How would I find like I just want to know how much does the third thing cost? Like how would I do that? Would I have
Oh,
to
so
like tag together like
hmm
the ID with the amount?
okay. I see what you're saying. So yeah, there are instances where how can I explain this?
And if it's too deep for now, then we can
So
switch
no, no,
forward.
no, no, you're fine. So ye- it's so normally, so like if you had in that specific instance what you're talking about, um, I'm trying to see. So we don't necessarily talk about it. So there's two ways that what you're talking about would be presented, right? It would be presented as a there would be an array. So you necessarily wouldn't have um so this expense, it will be expenses, and then there could be it'll be an array of objects, right? So it would be the same way that we would access items in an array, right? So this would be you would have uh the brackets on the most outside of this. So this would be, instead of it being an object, it would be an array at the top level, and then each item in the array would be an object. So you would have uh the first item in the array, which would have the ID of one, and then the next item would have ID of two, and then so that would be an example of how you would access it. But we know that item one is at 0 index, and item two is at um 1 index, and item three is at 2 index. So you would just access it. You would access that array. So let's say the array was called expenses. You would be expenses, and then you do the bracket notation of two, and then that's you would get that third item, and then it'll let me see. Let me give an example. We'll definitely get more deep into it, but let me pull it up. Okay. Can we see that?
Yep.
Okay, let me go down here. Sorry. So we would have expenses, and then we'll have, like I said, we'll um as at two, and then you would do, if you wanted the amount, you would do dot amount, and then it will return the amount for that. So we know we're going to the array called expenses. We're accessing the item that's at the two index, and then we're getting that item's amount, dot amount. Does that make sense? Okay. So this is still going to be that key, but we could also do it this way. So we can use bracket notation as well in that regard. Okay. All right. And then, like I mentioned earlier, uh you get a error if you try to um use dot notation to access something with a dash in it. That's just the way it is, just because it could be a formatting error, is just the way JavaScript might handle these things. So you can get that error as well. Uh, but for modifying objects, um, so we have our category. So we'll use that dot notation. So we're gonna say we want to, at the where the key equals category, we want it to now equal food. So what it's gonna do, it already has that food, but it's going to, if category is not present, it's going to add category as a key, and it's gonna make the value food. But if it's already present, it's gonna take the value that's there and replace it with the new value. And then we have our delete. So delete, and then you're gonna expense dot category. So it's gonna go to the expense object, and at the category where the key matches category, it's gonna delete that item. So it's gonna delete the key, and it's gonna delete the value as well. So it's going to, instead of having these 4 items, it's only gonna have 3. And then it's gonna have amount and expense. So this is kind of like shorthand for it, right? Um is gonna see you're saying, okay, amount and expense. So in expense, so in this object called expense, it's gonna check if it's in there. And is since we have that amount in there, it's gonna return true. So it checks if it exists in this object. If it doesn't, it's gonna return false. So after we deleted the category, if we were to put category in here, it would return false because it doesn't exist now. All right. So then if you wanted to check what keys are present in an object, we would do the object dot keys, and then we're going to pass the object that we're wanting to check, which in this case is the expense. So it's going to return them as strings. It's going to return ID, description, amount, and category. And then it's gonna, if you wanted to return the values of an object, so all the values in the object, um, you do the same thing, but instead with the values. So it'd be the actual value. So if you know it's gonna return the actual value of it, so ID it returns a number, it's gonna return a number, and so on and so forth. Make sense? Okay, perfect. All right, so we got our loops. Yeah, so we got our loops. We got our for loop, and the for loop is going to essentially it could take some getting used to, but we have three uh things that we're passing into our for loop. So we're gonna declare a variable. So let I equal 0. And then it's going to be the first part. And see here, they're separated by a semicolon. So a common mistake will be using a comma to separate them because, in our objects and our arrays, we've seen that everything's separated by a comma, right? But in this case, we're separating our conditions for our for loop. Let me see. Yeah, our condition for our for loop by the semicolon. So the next item is going to be our while. So while this is true, it's going to keep iterating through the loop. So it's going to keep going through this loop while this statement is true. So we declare I equals 0. So while I is less than 5, we're going to keep going through this loop. And then this is our incrementer, the plus plus, the I plus plus. I know we talked about it's going to be what that's do is going to increment it by 1. So it's going to go up 1. So at the end of our loop, after we did everything in our loop, it's going to do this automatically. So we came to the end of our loop. It's going to say, okay, we're going to increment I. So I now equals 1. So the original value plus 1. You can do I plus 2, I plus 5, or however you want to do it, going through it. And then we're going to use our curly brackets, kind of similar like how we were declaring a function. So we're going to do our curly brackets. And then we're going to go through our conditions, right? So it can do how this one is console logging. So console.log I. So we told it to go through and loop through until I is, in this case, so while I is less than 5, we're going to keep going through, right? So just to give you an example of how it works. So we're going to go through. So we had initialized it. So in this one, we're going to go through and we're going to console log I, the value I, and it's going to print out 0 because we started at 0. So now there's nothing else. That's the end of this loop. It's going to then invoke this. which is gonna I is basically gonna be I plus one. So we're gonna bump I up one, and then now we're back at the start of our loop. So we're at the start of our loop. We're gonna check this condition again. Is I less than 5? It is. So we're gonna go on to the next one. Because I now equals 1 is still less than 5, and then we're gonna log one, the value 1, and then we're at the end of our loop again. So we're gonna plus 1 I. Now we're gonna do our check again. It sounds repetitive. That's why we do loops, so we don't have to manually repeat these over and over again, and it saves us a lot of time. And then it's gonna go check. So I now equals 2, which is still less than 5. And it's gonna do that so on until it gets to 5. So we did 4. So let's say we get to 4. I we did we're gonna console log 4, and then we're gonna check whether oh yeah, console log 4. We're at the end of the loop again, and we're gonna add 1 to that I, which now makes it 5. So now we're gonna check our condition, and I is I less than 5 at this point? No, because it's equal to 5. So we're no longer gonna go through our loop. We're gonna stop it there. That's where it ends. I know it's fairly simple, and that was a long-winded way of going through the process, but I want you to get the idea of how the loop working, what's happening with that loop. It's going through that process every single time until this condition is no longer true. Does that make sense? Okay. Uh, so we loop through this array. So, uh, fruits, and we got the strings: apple, banana, cherry. So so for let I equals 0, while I is less than fruits dot length. So this is a instance where we want to check every item in an array, right? So we want to go through and we want to get each item in this array. We don't know what's in our fruits array, but we want to find out. So this is a way that you would do that. This is that use case. So while fruits dot length, which is 3, right? So 0, 1, 2, but there's 3 items in there. So while our value is less than 3, we're gonna loop through, and that's gonna go through, and it's just gonna return each item in that array. So it's gonna 0 is gonna start. It's gonna start at 0. It's gonna return apples. We're at the end, so we're gonna increment, and then we see that I is still less than fruits dot length, which is 3, and then so on, so forth. So it's gonna go through each item and return. Where our I now equals 3. At this point, we got to the end. So it's equal to fruits dot length, so it's not gonna return, because if we were to attempt to access 4, there is no 4, so it's not gonna return a value. I forget exactly. I always forget. It's going to, I think, either I want to say it's gonna return a -1 in that instance, a negative value, which is a falsy value, or it's going to return undefined. I believe it's going to return undefined. Um, and that um, I'd have to double check on that. But for the sake of time, I'll just get through these. But do we have any questions on that? No. I know it sounds like a lot. It's pretty straightforward. Um, but we'll get through these. So we have these are our kind of shorthand version of these. So we have our fruits array. So for const fruit, so we're declaring it. So what this is doing is saying for each item in this array, we're gonna call it a fruit. So it's going to ask that it's gonna, when it gets into our function, essentially, we're calling that specific item that we're at that time that fruit. It's gonna be fruit. So it's gonna go through. So it's gonna be fruit of fruits. So it's gonna loop through each one and access it one at a time. But while we're at that particular item, we're addressing it as fruit. So it's console.log fruit. When we're at the 0 index, it's going to return apple. And then at the next item, it's going to return banana. And at the next item, it's going to return cherry. So so the keyword of is typically reserved for like arrays. Um, and then for objects, you'll see the N. So the N on the next one, you'll see the N. So it's saying in expense objects, we're looking for const key in object. It's referencing that key. So we go back to expense. It's calling because we're at that item. It's saying like the key. So you want you'll see it usually like this, and it's a good way to remember it, that we're talking about the keys. So we had our ID. So each item we're going through and we're referencing by the ID. So we the console log the key. So at that point we're referencing by the key. So the key is going to be whatever the key is called. And then so you'll see here that it's returning the key. Remember earlier it returned the string of the keys when we did the object.keys. It returned the string version of that. So here it's doing the same as returning the string version. And then we're gonna return the expense. So we're gonna explicitly call the object expense and then bracket notation key. So it's just for the key at that time. So we know that key is referencing at this item is referencing item, the ID key. And then when we do this, we're accessing the value for that key, which is 1. And then same thing here. We're doing the key, the amount key, and then the value of we're doing the explicit call to the object and the value of that key, which is going to be 10 from earlier. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? No? Okay. And then the loop control. So these are things. So we have break. So what it does is when it evaluates this break, it's gonna tell it to stop the loop. So you can do it for conditions. So like if we're going through, so we're doing our for loop, I equals 0, while I is less than 10, we're gonna increment at the end of the condition, we're gonna increment by 1. However, in here we have a if condition, a if statement. So if I equals 5, strictly 5. So this is the strict operator. So with the 3, so if it equals 5, the number 5 is going to exit the loop immediately. It's going to stop. It's going to stop the loop no matter what. So if we were doing it by 2s instead of 1s, and we were doing all the evens, and then we skipped 5, it wouldn't evaluate. It wouldn't see ever that it was 5, so it would continue through the loop until it got to 10. But if we increment by 1, it's going to go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then every time it runs through this loop, it's doing this check. But once it sees that it equals 5, it's going to break, and that's going to exit the loop regardless of anything, and it's going to take you out of this loop and on to the next um thing in the process. Does that make sense? And then we got our skip to the next iteration. So similar to break, but instead of breaking the loop completely and Xing out of the loop completely and stopping all loops, it's going to continue to the next iteration. So if it equals 2, then we're going to skip this instant of the loop, and then it's going to go to the end of the loop, and then it's going to increment and then continue on. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So debugging, uh, we have our console log, which we're familiar with, um, which is just going to output whatever we put in this string. Is going to input the basic output console dot error. So it's going to be an error message. It's going to show as an error message. It's going to be read in the console. So what you're familiar with seeing when there's an error is all it's telling it is to present it as an error. JavaScript's going to treat it like an error, and you'll get it'll usually, like if it's in the middle of like a function or something, it'll usually break out of that function. So if you were to do this in a like a loop, it would stop the loop as well, and then propagate telling you like, hey, this is the error I came across. Warn, it doesn't stop it. It just shows a warning message. It shows you that there is this problem, but it will continue on. Uh, and then console.table, we're familiar with, like we had the tables. It'll do it in like a nice little table format. It'll present it in like a little table format, and then it's in an array. But it'll do A1 and then A2, and it'll have that table format that we're used to with the the rows and the columns. So this would be the A column, and then this would be the rows. So it would be like the A column, and then it'll be a row with 1 and then a row with 2, if that makes sense. Like I said, I know it's a lot to take in. You're not expected to remember all of this. It's just so that you can have it priming you with this information, so it'll be there in your brain somewhere. So then we got our common error types. We have our our reference error is a variable not defined. So like if you were trying to call something, like you said, return house, but we never defined house, it doesn't know what we're referring to. So it's a reference error. Type error is usually the wrong type operation. So like here they're trying to call a toString on a null value. ToString is usually like expecting like an array, so it doesn't have that expected type that we would expect when you call a toString on. A syntax error is usually when there is like a error with the syntax. So like if we were trying to do the spread operator, the spread syntax, if we did like 2 dots, that would be an example. Instead of 2 dots instead of 3 dots, that would be an example of a syntax error. And then the debugging tips. Um, One, you want to make sure you read the error message. So if you get an error while you're doing something, you always want to read the error message because it tells you the line number where the error occurred. So that's the first thing you always want to do when you have something happen unexpectedly. You uncheck the console and check the error. See if there's any error messages and where the error points you to. And a lot of the time it'll tell you if it was inside of a function, it'll tell you the line number, but it'll also tell you in what function you got the error from. Console log. So console logging is good for if you want to print out certain things to see what value you're getting from that. So if you're doing a function, you can console log a function or an array to see if you're getting the expected value or the function returning the expected value. And then you can check types of with type of and then the variable. So if you want to do a type of, and then like let's say we did an array, but you want to make sure that it stayed an array throughout like a certain process, or you want to check, or if you want to check to make sure something is a type of an array before you start doing a um, function on it, or if before you pass it through a method, or yeah, try to use a method on it. That's something you can do as well. So that'd be like a use case for that. And then you can comment out code. So if you're having an issue with something, like if you added something, you can comment out code to see like where it's going wrong. Like if it you comment out one line and it now works, then you know the problem was with that specific line of code. So um that's the idea behind that. Any questions so far? No? Okay. I know we're over time, so I'm trying to hurry through it. Um let's see. These are example functions. Um I will say I'll get with Brian on this and we can go over if we need to, we can go over it on Saturday. Uh we can go over it so that way we're not really missing out. But these are functions just implementing some of the things that we talked about going through the process. We went a little bit over time, but I want to make sure you keep your time for you so we can I would say we can stop it there. Um, I'll go through like the first two questions, um, so that way we can get these a couple of the questions in, and then if we need to on Saturday, we can go over this stuff again, like the functions. Um, I can also just share this with you so you can look at it and you can uh reference it and get a good idea over it, so you can go over it in your own time as well. But for the sake of time, I'll just go these first two questions. So, how do you add an item to the end of an array?
Is it dot push?
Yes, it would be the dot push method, the push method. So, like, you're gonna push it onto the back of the array. Uh, it's kind of weird, but I like to think about like standing behind the array, like pushing onto it, like I'm pushing the value onto the array. But the opposite of that would be like pop. So if we were popping, I'll pop it off the back, just like a quick pop it off real quick, type of thing. Um, but then what is the difference between slice and spice or splice? I said spice. This is something that you'll get confused. You'll get them confused with each other, and like if you're in Essence, you might mention it. And it's very common, even if you're experienced, to get them confused. So I can tell you a good way to remember. So I say a good way to remember it. You'll still get them confused, but slice is going to um essentially just uh take the values and return them, but it's not going to change the array. Splice is going to uh actually change the array because it's going to take those values, it's going to remove those values, and it's going to return them as well. But slice doesn't change the array, it just returns those values, and splice is going to uh it's going to eliminate those values and then return them as well. All right, any questions for me? I know we're over time. Sorry for that. I ain't got my cadence to me if I'm out of practice, but any questions or anything, concerns or anything?
No, it was a great class. Just so you know, that file that you're looking at, it's under review and exercises. It's the review.
It is okay. Perfect. Okay. Thank you for that. I appreciate
No
that.
problem.
Okay. Any questions for me? No questions. All right. I'm sorry for going over time, but I appreciate y'all being patient with the process. If you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to reach out to me. But other than that, I'll see y'all on Saturday.
All right. Thank you.
All right.
Thank
Thank you
you.
all. Of
Bye.
course. Bye.